These Karens got eaten alive by animals. YouTube. https://www.youtube.com/watch?n/v=n52tu1hfncn. Transcript 00:00. In today's video we are diving into 5 Karens who got eaten alive by animals. From a trash thrown at a lion to get its attention, to a parent who paid the ultimate price for her rage. But first, let's start with a story that'll make you think twice about power trips, because sometimes the most dangerous predator isn't the one you're trying to control. 0020. It was August 22, 2016, and the suffocating Florida heat had already claimed 2 lives that summer in Broward County. But Brenda Holloway was about to become the 3rd casualty of a different kind of predator. Brenda Holloway, 62, had spent 37 years processing insurance claims before retiring to become the self-appointed guardian of homeowner association regulations. 0040. Brenda had earned her reputation through consistent enforcement of community standards. She carried a laminated copy of the HOA bylaws in her purse and had personally issued multiple violation notices in her 3 years of retirement. That Tuesday afternoon, Brenda had spotted a 15-year-old feeding ducks near the retention pond with a bag of bread. 0058. Witnesses said she marched across the perfectly maintained lawn. The teen had been visiting his grandmother in the community and was unaware of the feeding restrictions that Brenda enforced. When she confiscated his bread bag and began lecturing him about creating dependencies in wildlife, several residents emerged from their air-conditioned homes to watch the familiar scene unfold. 118. The retention pond stretched across 2 acres of the community's center, its murky green surface disguising the ecosystem beneath. American alligators are perfectly adapted ambush predators capable of remaining motionless for hours. Adults can reach lengths of 10 to 11 feet, still capable of lethal force. Once they secure prey, their instinct is to perform death rolls that disorient victims while tearing flesh and breaking bones. Likely determined to make her point about feeding restrictions, Brenda strode directly to the pond's edge with a confiscated bread bag. The water appeared calm, obscuring any movement beneath. Witnesses said she positioned herself on the concrete retaining wall, leaning forward to dispose of the bread by throwing it into the center of the pond, rather than near the shore where animals could access it. The attack came without warning as Brenda extended her arm over the water. An alligator surged forward from a shallow, submerged shelf just below the retaining wall, its jaws clamping around her right forearm with devastating force. The impact knocked her off balance as the reptile's weight, later estimated by wildlife officers as consistent with an 11-foot animal, dragged her into the murky water. Her screams echoed across the community as the alligator submerged her almost immediately, initiating violent rolling movements consistent with predatory restraint behavior. Witnesses watched in horror as Brenda disappeared beneath the surface, the water churning violently around the thrashing forms. She resurfaced only for a matter of seconds, gasping and flailing with her left arm. Blood spreading rapidly from catastrophic injuries to her right limb. The alligator maintained its grip, rolling again in short, forceful rotations that stripped tissue and fractured bone. Her desperate attempts to reach the concrete edge were futile against the reptile's overwhelming strength. She was pulled under again almost immediately, and the struggle ended. The entire attack lasted well under 2 minutes. The teenager ran to the nearest house and called 911. Deputies arrived within 12 minutes, followed by wildlife officers who brought specialized equipment for water recovery operations. The alligator had disappeared into the pond's depths with Brenda's body, forcing officers to wait until evening when the reptile was more likely to surface. Brenda's remains were recovered at 7:30 p.m. after wildlife officers located and euthanized an alligator believed to be responsible for the attack. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from massive trauma and drowning. Tissue analysis confirmed that repeated feeding activity had habituated local alligators to human presence. The Palms at Cypress Creek installed reinforced fencing and restricted access barriers averaging 6 feet in height around the pond perimeter and posted multiple warning signs in English and Spanish. Later, safety reviews noted that years of residents feeding wildlife had created the dangerous conditions that led to Brenda's death. 0355. Though no formal admission of liability was ever made public, Brenda's tragic encounter served as a grim reminder that some boundaries should never be crossed. And in South Africa, a woman would soon discover that the king of beasts shows no mercy to those who dare disturb his slumber. It was May 3rd, 2017, and the African sun hung mercilessly over a private reserve, casting harsh shadows across the savannah, where a woman would draw her final breath beneath a predator's crushing jaws. 422. Madison McCrae was a 27-year-old from Phoenix, Arizona, a retail worker known among her co-workers for demanding manager attention over trivial issues and loudly insisting on better service. People said she had cultivated a sense of entitlement that extended to every aspect of her life. She had scraped together savings from part-time work to fund a South African safari, her first trip outside the United States. But she likely saw it less as a chance to explore wildlife and more as an opportunity to enforce her expectations on the world and to capture dramatic content for Instagram. Madison had booked the cheapest safari package available, yet the private reserve said she constantly complained that the accommodations and itinerary weren't up to standard. She frequently demanded exceptions from guides, snapping at them when things didn't match the experience she believed she was owed. Their guide had already spotted a pride of lions resting near a seasonal watering hole, the massive male lying in the shade of a marula tree within established stalking distance, estimated at 80 to 100 yards from the vehicle. African lions are apex predators capable of reaching speeds of up to 40 miles per hour in short bursts, with males weighing up to 420 pounds and possessing jaws strong enough to collapse a large unknowled's windpipe within seconds. The guide had emphasized multiple times that morning that guests must remain in their vehicles at all times, explaining that lions view humans outside of vehicles as prey or territorial threats, rather than the non-threatening observers they appear to be when seated in safari trucks. Madison had listened to the safety briefing while scrolling through her phone, occasionally asking when they would get closer to the animals for better photos. The vehicle was stationary, with the engine idling, positioned on open ground with no fencing or barriers. Guests remained seated as required, while Yan momentarily turned his attention to a radio call. Madison immediately began complaining about the distance to the lions, arguing that her photos would be worthless from so far away. Other tourists were visibly uncomfortable as the guide tried to calm her down. She had noticed the male lion lying motionless and misinterpreted his stillness as deep sleep. Without permission and in direct violation of protocol, Madison stepped down from the vehicle, clutching her camera. Relying on proximity and her sudden movement alone, she moved several yards away from the truck, closing the distance further, while the lion remained low and facing her. The male lion's response was immediate and terrifying. His head snapped up, locking onto Madison as she raised her camera well within the animal's ambush zone. Lions are ambush predators, and this male had already been positioned to stalk from close range. He rose to his feet with fluid-controlled power. As Madison finally grasped the scale of her error, she turned to run, but witnesses said her boots slipped on loose gravel as the lion lunged forward. The lion covered the distance in seconds, his force slamming into Madison's upper back and driving her face first into the ground. The lion clamped his jaws around Madison's throat, causing rapid incapacitation followed by loss of consciousness. The pressure of the bite and the force of her fall caused catastrophic cervical trauma. 7:15. Blood spread rapidly beneath her as the lion maintained his hold until her body went slack. The lion then seized Madison by the shoulder and dragged her toward a dense cluster of thorn bushes, a common behavior intended to secure a kill away from perceived threats and scavengers. The remaining guests watched in paralyzed silence as the lion stood over the body, his posture rigid and alert. 7:36. The guide radioed park control immediately, his voice controlled as he reported a probable wildlife fatality and requested armed assistance. Armed rangers arrived approximately 14 minutes later. The lion was driven off using vehicles and warning shots, retreating into the brush before the team approached. 7:54. Madison was pronounced dead at the scene. Her body was later transported for formal examination, which determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation due to tracheal collapse and massive vascular injury to the neck, with contributing blunt force trauma from the initial takedown. The reserve conducted a comprehensive review of its safety procedures. Investigators concluded that existing protocols had been followed and that Madison's decision to exit the vehicle and provoke the animal directly led to the fatal encounter. The death was ruled accidental. The lion was not euthanized, with authorities determining that the animal had behaved in accordance with natural instincts. The African savanna witnessed another fatal encounter with a provoked lion. And in Australia, an HR consultant's loud demands would end with her being dragged into a violent death roll. It was July 22, 2016, and the murky waters of the Daintree River held secrets that had claimed lives for millennia. Secrets that Karla Wenrich would discover in the most horrific way possible, as the ancient predator beneath the surface prepared for an attack. Karla was a 41-year-old human resources consultant from Sydney, known throughout her mid-tier consulting firm for her aggressive personality and relentless complaints about what she perceived as inadequate service. Her colleagues privately described her as someone who treated every interaction as a battle to be won. Karla had built her reputation on never backing down from confrontation. Whether berating restaurant servers or demanding refunds from hotels, this trip to Queensland represented Karla's first real vacation in 3 years, funded by a recent promotion. Her colleagues said that she had specifically chosen the Daintree River cruise after reading online reviews that promised close encounters with saltwater crocodiles. Her stated goal was to capture dramatic photos for her social media account, which she used primarily to document her travels and criticize businesses that failed to meet her expectations. The Daintree River wound through ancient rainforest where saltwater crocodiles had ruled as apex predators. These massive reptiles can grow up to 20 feet long and weigh well over a ton, with a bite force exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch. Primarily ambush predators, saltwater crocodiles rely on stealth and positioning rather than pursuit. Capable of explosive bursts of speed both in water and at the water's edge. The tour guide Jaime was a weathered local who had been running river cruises for 15 years without incident. That morning he had specifically warned the 12 passengers about maintaining distance from the water and remaining seated at all times. He pointed out fresh slide marks on the muddy banks, evidence of large crocodiles moving between water and land, and explained that the river's murky water made it impossible to see submerged animals. Several passengers nodded seriously, but others noted Karla rolling her eyes and muttering audibly about overcautious tour guides. 20 minutes into the cruise, the guide said he spotted a massive saltwater crocodile floating near a fallen tree, its eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline. He estimated the animal at roughly 18 feet long, explaining to passengers that this was likely a territorial male. As the boat maintained a safe distance of about 50 yards, Karla became increasingly agitated, loudly complaining that they were too far away for good photos. She demanded that they move closer, dismissing the guide's explanations about safety protocols as gatekeeping wildlife. When other passengers began backing away from the railings as Jaime had instructed, Karla declared that crocodiles were lazy unless provoked. Despite repeated warnings, she stood up and moved to the boat's edge, leaning over the waist-high aluminum railing, her phone ready. Jaime immediately cut the engine and ordered Karla to sit down, stepping toward her and reaching for her arm, but she ignored him completely. Leaning farther over the railing, she began slapping the water surface with her open palm, trying to provoke a reaction from the distant crocodile for her video. The other tourists watched in horror as she continued her aggressive behavior, some pleading with her to stop. Jaime restarted the engine in an attempt to back the boat away, but Karla had already drawn the attention of a predator that had silently repositioned beneath the surface, responding to vibration and disturbance. The attack came without warning. The crocodile had submerged and approached the boat underwater. In a single explosive movement, it surged upward from directly beneath where Karla leaned over the railing. The massive jaws, lined with over 60 conical teeth designed to grip and crush, clamped onto her lower torso. The force of the strike violently bent her body over the railing, pulling her center of mass toward the water. Witnesses later described hearing a loud cracking sound as the crocodile's jaws closed, consistent with severe skeletal trauma, later documented by the coroner. Blood spread rapidly across the water surface as the predator initiated a death roll, a spinning maneuver used to disable and dismember prey. Based on the pattern of injuries, Karla's spine was believed to have fractured during the first rotation, her body twisting unnaturally as the crocodile's mass rolled through the water. Within seconds, she was dragged completely under, the churning water turning crimson as the crocodile continued its violent feeding behavior. Passengers watched in frozen horror as the water boiled with movement, occasional glimpses of the crocodile's massive tail breaking the surface. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds from initial strike to final submersion, as estimated by multiple witnesses. Jaime immediately radioed emergency services. Several passengers reported that Carla's phone disappeared beneath the surface during the initial strike, leaving no usable footage of the attack. Marine rescue units arrived approximately 20 minutes later, but there was nothing to be done except begin a search. The crocodile had disappeared into the river's depths, behavior consistent with retreating to a submerged cache site. Carla's body was recovered the following day, lodged against a submerged branch nearly half a mile downstream. The coroner's report documented massive trauma to the torso and pelvis, with spiral fractures characteristic of rotational force consistent with a crocodile death roll. Cause of death was listed as massive blood loss, with drowning as a contributing factor. The incident received only brief regional news coverage, with authorities emphasizing that the victim had ignored multiple safety warnings. The cruise operator implemented stricter physical enforcement of seating rules and clearer exclusion protocols, while Carla's family quietly deleted her social media accounts. As the Daintree River bore witness to one woman's fatal mockery of nature's most patient predators in Indonesia, a woman's dismissal of ranger warnings would lead her to a Komodo dragon. It was September 11, 2016, in the Komodo National Park's Lo Liang sector, where the ancient predators that ruled these volcanic islands. The morning air shimmered with heat as tour groups gathered near the ranger station, unaware that within hours the pristine wilderness would be stained with blood and the screams of a woman who believed rules were merely suggestions. Maribel Quayle was a 44-year-old purchasing coordinator from Perth. Known among her colleagues for her stubborn independence and casual disregard for authority, she had booked a park-authorized but bare-bones group trek, drawn by photos of the famous Komodo dragons, and determined to prove that expensive guided experiences were unnecessary for seasoned travelers. Her colleagues said Maribel prided herself on being practical and no-nonsense, dismissing what she called tourist theater designed to extract extra fees from gullible visitors. Her travel stories, retold by friends and colleagues, documented a pattern of ignoring local warnings and guides. From swimming in restricted areas in Bali to hiking alone in remote parts of Thailand. This trip to Komodo was meant to be the crown jewel of her Southeast Asian adventure, and she had specifically chosen the lowest cost tour tier permitted by the park. Confident that her instincts would keep her safe where others needed supervision, Maribel arrived wearing bright red flip-flops and a dismissive attitude toward the mandatory safety briefing, standing at the back of the group and intermittently checking her phone as rangers explained the dangers of the world's largest lizard species. Komodo dragons are not cooperative hunters, but multiple individuals are often independently drawn to the same bleeding prey. Komodo dragons are apex predators that can reach 9 to 10 feet in length and exceed 150 pounds, equipped with serrated teeth and venom glands that release anticoagulant compounds, compounding hemorrhage over minutes. While bacterial infection is no longer considered the primary killing mechanism, it remains a serious secondary risk. During the mandatory briefing, the head ranger had been explicit. Remain within approximately 15 to 20 feet of the guide at all times. Never sit or crouch and never leave the marked trail. He warned the group that an adult dragon had been observed moving through the area earlier that morning, increasing the likelihood of close encounters. Maribel scoffed when told her footwear was inappropriate, insisting she had worn flip-flops across Asia without incident. When Kadic warned that open wounds, bright colors and strong scents could elevate risk, Maribel laughed audibly, dismissing the guidance. 20 minutes into the trek, as temperatures climbed past 95 degrees Fahrenheit, Maribel began lagging behind, complaining about the heat and the guide's pace. When the group paused to observe a dragon resting near a watering hole, Maribel noticed a shaded rocky outcrop about 50 yards away and announced she was going to sit there. The ranger ordered her to return immediately, but she waved him off and continued walking. She sat down, removed her flip-flops and applied sunscreen. What Maribel didn't realize was that an adult Komodo dragon had been moving intermittently through this corridor since early morning, following residual scent trails from recent prey activity. The reptile emerged silently from a low scrub behind her. When Marbelle noticed it, she attempted to shoo it away with her flip-flop, a gesture that registered as erratic movement. The dragon struck from a shallow shelf just below the retaining terrain, clamping onto her left foot. The serrated teeth sank into her skin as Marbelle screamed. Venom-induced anticoagulation compounded the hemorrhage, causing her movements to slow within minutes. She fell backward as the dragon released and rabbit before withdrawing briefly. Blood pooled beneath her as shock began to set in. As Marbelle attempted to crawl, the blood scent attracted a second dragon, which arrived independently and struck in short, violent bursts. The attacks were brief, with the animals retreating between bites. Rangers eventually located her, positioned at a distance, used standard deterrence tools, including forked control poles and shouted commands, protocols designed to redirect dragons without provoking escalation. 1904. They radioed for emergency response immediately, but limited visibility of the uneven volcanic terrain delayed access. Backup personnel reached the site approximately 35 minutes after the initial attack, by which time Marbelle had no detectable pulse. She was transported by boat to Labuan Bajo, where she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. 1924. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exsanguination following traumatic bite injuries with venom-induced anticoagulation. Marbelle's funeral was held quietly in Perth a week later, attended by close family and a few colleagues who described her as adventurous but headstrong. The incident received brief local coverage, with park officials reiterating that the victim's decision to leave the group directly violated safety protocol. Tours resumed weeks later without structural changes. The Komodo dragons of Indonesia claimed another victim who had seen safety protocol as mere dramatics. Meanwhile, in Kenya, a farm manager's decision to personally lead a harassment campaign against territorial hippos would result in her death. It was October 3, 2014, and the moonless night around Lake Naivasha would witness the brutal consequences of human arrogance, as Mario learned too late that hippos kill more people in Africa than any other large mammal. Their massive jaws designed to crush boats and bones with equal efficiency. Maris was a 52-year-old operations manager at one of Lake Naivasha's largest flower farms, a position she had held for 8 years through a combination of aggressive management and cost-cutting measures that impressed foreign investors. Known among workers for her impatience with what she considered excuses, Maris had built her reputation on solving problems through direct action rather than accommodation. Her workers described her as someone who viewed wildlife as obstacles to productivity, frequently complaining about the hippos that crossed farm property nightly on their way between grazing areas and the lake. The flower export business was highly competitive, and her workers said she prided herself on maintaining schedules that other farms couldn't match. Recent hippo activity had damaged irrigation lines and trampled flower beds, costing the farm thousands of dollars in lost revenue. Maris had grown increasingly frustrated with what she saw as the workers' passive acceptance of the situation. When the farm's wildlife service liaison suggested installing barriers and lighting to redirect the hippo's path, Maris dismissed the recommendation as expensive and unnecessary. Instead, she had ordered workers to use emergency flares and noisemakers to drive the animals away from the farm's main pathways. She wanted to establish human dominance over the hippos and force them to find alternative routes that wouldn't impact production. Lake Naivasha's shoreline was dotted with papyrus reeds and acacia trees, creating a maze of paths that hippos had used for generations to move between water and grazing areas. Hippos are among Africa's most dangerous animals, with adult bulls weighing up to 8,000 pounds and possessing jaws that can open to 150 degrees, revealing canine teeth up to 20 in long. Their bite force exceeds 1,800 pounds per square inch, easily capable of snapping a canoe in half or crushing human bones to powder. Farm workers had repeatedly warned Maris that harassing hippos was dangerous, explaining that the animals became increasingly aggressive when their established paths were disrupted. The night security guard, a local man named Joseph Kamau, had specifically told her that recent flare harassment had made the hippos more unpredictable and territorial. Earlier that week, workers had reported seeing a large bull hippo lingering near the farm's main pathway instead of returning directly to the lake after grazing. Fresh dung and deep hoof prints in the mud indicated the animal was spending more time in the area, a behavioral change that experienced locals recognized as a warning sign. 2258. On the night of October 3rd, Maris decided to personally oversee the harassment operation, bringing 3 workers and Camo to the main pathway where hippos typically crossed around midnight. She carried a powerful flashlight and 2 emergency flares, instructing the team to spread out along a 200-foot section of the path. 2319. Against Camo's advice, Maris positioned herself at the front of the group, approximately 50 feet ahead of the others. When the familiar sound of hippos moving through the reeds became audible around 11:45 p.m., she immediately lit a flare and began advancing toward the noise, waving the bright flame and shouting to drive the animals away. 2338. The workers behind her watched as Maris's flashlight beam swept back and forth through the tall grass beside the path. For several minutes, the hippos seemed to retreat toward the lake, their heavy breathing and splashing growing more distant. Camo called for Maris to return to the group, but she continued forward, determined to ensure the hippos had completely abandoned the area. Suddenly, the workers saw Maris's flashlight suddenly stop moving. In the silence that followed, they heard a deep explosive exhale, the warning sound hippos make before attacking. Before anyone could react, a massive bull hippo charged from the tall grass at close range, its enormous bulk moving with shocking speed despite weighing between 6,000 to 8,000 pounds. The attack was swift and devastating. 2 workers witnessed the hippo strike Maris down with its massive head. She fell backward onto the muddy path as the bull reared up, its cavernous mouth opening. In a single crushing bite, the hippo clamped its jaws across Maris's waist. The hippo's bite force catastrophically crushed her pelvis and lower spine, causing her lower body to go completely limp while her torso remained trapped in the animal's massive jaws. Maris's body becoming increasingly mangled with each violent movement. Within moments, the hippo neutralized the perceived threat, delivering additional crushing bites to her torso and abdomen. The witnesses watched in frozen horror as Maris's body was thrown aside, her clothing torn and soaked with blood, the bull snorting loudly as it asserted control over the pathway. The entire attack lasted in under a minute. After disabling and killing the intruder, the hippo retreated toward the lake, leaving behind a severely mutilated body and a spreading pool of blood on the muddy path. Camo began running toward the farm buildings to call for help. Farm security contacted emergency services immediately, but responders didn't arrive for nearly 30 minutes due to the remote location and poor road conditions. By then, there was little to recover except extensive traumatic injuries and scattered personal effects. The coroner's report noted massive trauma to the torso and abdomen, with the cause of death listed as extenuation and crushing injuries consistent with a hippo attack. The incident was ruled a case of wildlife provocation, with authorities noting that harassment of hippos violated Wildlife Service guidelines. The flower farm installed barriers and lighting along hippo pathways and implemented strict policies prohibiting worker interaction with wildlife. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.